Free since 2013, is it? 2014. Okay, good. So we are sort of rather behind schedule, and so I'm going to. I mean, I said to each of the speakers 10 minutes. If you can possibly manage to be less than 10 minutes, we'd be grateful. And I think we'll slightly curtail the panel section of the at the end of the after this. But anyway, so.
Okay. Hello. By way of a very brief introduction, yeah, I'm Liz O'Neill. I'm the director of GM Free, which means I'm paid staff, which makes me unusual and very lucky in all activist circles. I'm also, I want to just be really upfront that I am probably the least qualified person in this room to talk about how we got to where we are, because I wasn't active on GM. I've probably come to this from a very different path than those people. I first encountered GM as a biochemistry undergraduate, thought it sounded amazing, you know, brought all the stuff about how much good it was going to do in the world, and have my objections to GM grew over the years of understanding the political environment and the ways in which it's used, you know, and yeah, just kind of growing up a bit really, and not swallowing everything that you're told as a teenage idealistic undergraduate. So I am going to send a little pile of paper. Brad, you don't have to have one, but it would be nice for everyone if you could take one home. That's our GM briefing on Brexit, which will mean that I can say slightly less about that. So what Dave wanted me to talk about was the de facto moratorium in the EU, and I think even that phrase is quite a loaded one, so I think I will just describe the situation as I see it, and then go on to the way that Brexit could change that, and what we're doing about that. I think we'll probably get more on historical perspective in the panel discussion afterwards. But the number one thing is that what has kept GM crops out of our fields in a legal sense, obviously what has kept them out is the work that you all did, and that was discussed earlier, but in a legal sense what keeps GM out of our fields is EU regulations and processes. And the really key elements of that are that there are case-by-case assessments, that we don't have what the Americans refer to as substantial equivalence. So all instances of GM to be released into the environment have to be assessed on an individual basis. That assessment covers safety in terms of people and environment. And there is also some role for non-safety issues. That's quite contentious and doesn't go through quite the same framing. And you know, we will hear from Claire about all the weaknesses, I'm sure, of that system, that assessment of safety. But when you compare the EU to many other parts of the world, there is something. There is an assessment to complain about, which is a very different situation than it could have been. What actually in practice has kept GM out of our fields in in the European context is qualified majority voting. It's the way that the countries vote on these things, because actually lots and lots of crops or crop traits have had positive assessments by, they've gone through that safety assessment stuff, and we get lots of different language about why them getting stuck in the system. My absolute favourite is that European countries are blocking GM on political grounds, as if that's not a good thing, as if politics isn't actually the way that the people exert power. That one absolutely astounds me, because of course we just want one profession, the scientists, to run everything. I'm sure our scientists would not want that. Qualified majority voting is actually a very high bar for decision making, and that is, I don't want to get too much into the pros and cons of the European Union, but the way you have to have the weight of a lot of countries and a lot of big countries to make something happen. The other really big piece of legislation, the other big regulation, is labelling. The use of GM in foods for human consumption has to be declared on the label of those foods. And that is the tool that gives consumers the power to show they don't want it. And going kind of up slightly level to principles, the underlying principle that supports all of that is the proportionate principle, which is enshrined in the EU treaty. So it's that's absolutely fundamental to all of the arguments that are made politically to put through all those other regulations and processes that I've talked about. Going back to that issue of the hurdle, the very high bar of qualified majority voting, I think it's really important to be aware of what has got through that, because it is a high bar. A lot of countries have to agree, and over 90 GM traits have been approved through that process for import, so that's in food and feed. So it's not a rock solid wall against GM. At the moment, there's only one crop approved for cultivation, which is this maize. It's grown in Spain and Portugal, largely. There's a couple of other places, although I think somebody might correct me, Claire probably knows best. Is it Romania that just stopped? Was it Romania?
Just a while ago.
Yeah, someone's just had a full year of no planting. They didn't have a lot, but it's a nice, it's another nice one to put your marker pen on. So, although it's a very high bar, it has been reached. It has been reached on a large number of occasions for import, and it has been reached occasionally for cultivation. Now, for our friends in Europe, the UK leaving will actually make that bar much higher because the UK always votes in favour. So who knows how that's going to pan out. With all of that regulation, there's a really big risk around newer GM techniques. There is a huge amount of pressure to get them classified as non-GM. And there is one reason alone, which is to make it easier to get them in use. So there's a huge and quite immediate threat, but it's a very technical and difficult threat. It's technical on a scientific point of view, and it's technical on a legal point of view. It comes down to things like where the commas are in the legal statements, and then it comes down to my scientist arguing with your scientist, and that kind of head-butting. It's all utter nonsense. They are clearly genetic engineering techniques, if you use that as a more generic term, but it's a really huge potential change on the horizon. Again,
by the way, Helena will be talking about that this afternoon.
I'm a bit of a doom and gloom merchant here, I'm afraid, but I think the other thing to bear in mind that is an outcome of those processes is I mentioned labelling earlier as being very empowering to consumers. The use of GM feed does not lead to labelling of the meat, eggs and dairy. Hence our
Sorry,
campaign.
I didn't hear that, Liz.
So the use of GM animal feed isn't labelled on the meat, eggs, dairy products and farm fish that it goes to produce. And actually their use is huge and widespread. The vast majority of non-organic, non-vegan food on sale in the UK comes from animals that have had at least some GM feed. Even your lovely grass-fed this or that, they're getting supplementary feed in the winter. And because it doesn't have to go on the label, we can't exert consumer demand for it very easily. We have to do great big campaigns. If without consumer demand, there's no segregation, and it becomes a very mixed supply chain. So there's a lot of stuff coming together there. And as I mentioned before, there's over 90 odd traits that are approved. There's plenty of stuff that it's legal to bring in. The other thing that we are seeing is GM ingredients are also creeping in. All these ghastly American sweets that you see. Even WH Smith, which doesn't really sell a lot of sweets, otherwise they sell things like Twinkies. Oreos are quite odd. Oreos, I think, are actually a really interesting example related to the Brexit stuff, so thank you. They are a huge American brand, And they used to be in the UK shops, and presumably similar to the rest of Europe, as an import. They will have then been GM. They also weren't vegetarian, just instantly. When they decided to push the UK and the EU market, they reformulated the product to not have GM ingredients. And they actually, incidentally, along the line became vegan, which is a really handy thing to know if you're catering for a group of vegans who want some sugary rubbish to eat. They are very widely available and vegan. So the main ones you see are all non-GM. However, every so often they try a new one. And we used to have on the old website, we had a really big picture of some mint Oreos, which were GM, and they'd been marked down. They hadn't sold, which is why I had them as quite a big picture, because it's quite a nice negative message. I noticed just the other day a big display of new mint Oreos in mainstream packaging and not imported. So they tried them out, people did like them, and now they've made them for the EU market. So they've had to change the formulation. So actually, to be an informed consumer, you have to read the label every time. You can't just go on brands. It's the same with Reese's peanut butter cups. The normal ones are not GM, but a lot of the kind of weird ones, the white chocolate ones, or the really big ones, or the variants, the sort of sub-brands, are often GM because they're imported. And all of this takes us really nicely onto the issues with Brexit. I'll kind of go backwards up my list, because one of the really, really key issues is that we have to keep our requirement that GM ingredients be labelled. Lots of stuff around cultivation would be very slow to change, because our farmers still need to trade in Europe. But we could lose the requirement to label GM products. Our manufacturers would still label them because they'd be selling them in Europe, but the American imports could just come in, the Twinkies and the different flavoured Oreos and all the rest of it could just come in very happily, and it would open the door. And I know Linda's going to talk a lot more about trade deals, but labelling's a really key issue there, because it's relatively flexible. We can still label for export, our manufacturers can label, but we could have unlabelled stuff alongside on the shelves alongside it. So Kellogg's cornflakes are GM in the States, non-GM here. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference if we didn't require a label. And they probably still make the non-GM ones up the road from me in Trafford Park. But if supply ran low, if they wanted to try out something different, they just ship them over quite happily. So there's, holding the line on labelling is really, really key. Other key issues around Brexit are obviously retaining regulation. We need to retain robust regulation, and it's really important that goes beyond scientific factors or safety issues. We need the right to say, yeah, do you know what? You might have proved it safe. We may or may not argue with whether you proved it safe, but even if it's met whatever bar you said, it's wrong for other reasons. It's not responsible, it's not fair, it's not sustainable. It's not all about whether or not it's going to kill us. It's about patenting and ownership of the food chain. So it's really important that we retain at least some wording around non-safety factors. We need the labelling, and we need effective measures to prevent contamination. Some of that comes back to those core principles which have been being debated just the last week in the context of the repeal bill, which is the precautionary principle, but also the polluter pays principle is really, really key. And there's some wording that I won't get quite right, but you're required to put right what you do wrong. I don't know if anyone can remember the wording of that one. It's more words, so it's harder to remember. And one of the key things that at the moment GM-free in our stuff that we're putting out on Brexit is we're dropping in the phrase all forms of genetic engineering, really consciously not using GM all the time, so that we're saying, yeah, do you know what? Have your little spat about what you call it. What we mean is all that stuff, because it's all got the same problems. It's all patented. It's all about interfering at a molecular level. It's all about trying to solve systemic problems one gene at a time, which simply doesn't work. It just hands control over to the big corporations. So that's a phrase we're using. I know it's a little bit controversial. It's a little bit controversial whether you say GM or not GM, but I'm going for mixing it all up, partly to actually disarm that and say, do you know what? It's not a thing. The definition is not, the use of language is not a thing. What's important is how it's regulated.
So sorry, which definition are you using? Which phrase do you use?
We use GM most of the time. It's in the name, and I think, funnily enough, we had quite a lot of discussion about this when I was very new at GM Freeze, because we did a big sort of strategy review. And Lawrence, I think, made some really important points about the inadequacy of the term GM. And in fact, it's very easy for Twitter trolls, for example, to attack it and say, oh, all our genes are modified. And it's just semantic rubbish. If you use it with a capital G and a capital M, it's a piece of jargon. It's a piece of jargon that has a legal meaning. So we do use that most of the time. But when we're trying to make a broader point, I would try hard to throw in as often as possible all forms of genetic engineering. Because it's just kind of sweeping it up without necessarily that being the topic under discussion, and I think might be quite a good habit for quite a lot of us to use.
All forms of genetic engineering.
Yeah, I mean, if people find that not good, then please give me a better one. The nice thing about the briefing is it's online, so I can change it.
But doesn't the GM industry say that it's not genetically engineered, all these new techniques?
They say they're not GM and they don't give rise to GMOs. I haven't personally seen them say reject genetic engineered, but they might well do, because I'm not following it as carefully as Helena.
Actually, let's
Yeah,
Liz finish her talk. Have you already? So, okay,
yeah, I'm done. I'm done.
Good. And the other thing is that there'll be more time for chance to discuss that. Helena's going to talk about that this afternoon.